They say that when a god falls, the earth shudders in sympathy. They say that the heavens weep and the tides recoil. But on the island of Tsushima, legends are usually written in the ink of blood and the ashes of burning villages. We thought we knew war. We thought the Mongols were the ultimate test of our resolve. We were wrong. The greatest test did not sail across the ocean on wooden ships. It fell from the stars, screaming like a dying sun, to test the blade of the ghost against the hammer of a god. The prologue. It was a night that belonged to the spirits. The moon hung low and bloated, a sickly yellow orb peering through the fractured clouds of an approaching winter storm. The air was cold, biting at the exposed skin of the fishermen casting their nets in the Komoda Inlet. But it was quiet. Too quiet. It was the silence of a predator holding its breath. Then, the silence was murdered. High above the atmosphere, the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that spans the cosmos, shattered. It did not break with a sound, but with a flash of light so intense it turned the midnight sky into noon for a heartbeat. And from that blinding tear in reality, a star fell. It plummeted with the weight of a collapsing mountain, tearing through the clouds, boiling the rain, and slamming into the coastline with a catastrophic impact that registered in the bones of every living thing on the island. Jin Sakai was miles away, meditating by the fox dens near the Golden Forest, when the world ended. It started as a vibration in the soles of his boots, a rhythmic thumping that quickly escalated into a violent convulsion of the earth. The trees around him swayed as if caught in a hurricane, shedding their golden leaves in a sudden, panicked shower. His horse, Nobu, reared up, screaming in primal terror, snapping the reins that tethered him to a cedar tree. Jin was on his feet instantly, his hand instinctively finding the hilt of his katana. He looked north, toward the coast. A pillar of steam and debris was rising miles into the air, blotting out the stars. It looked like a volcano had erupted from the sea. Mongols? Jin whispered the word, but it tasted like a lie on his tongue. The Mongols had black powder, yes. They had siege engines that could shatter stone walls. But they did not have the power to make the island scream. This was something else. This was a violence that felt ancient, elemental. He calmed Nobu with a gentle hand and a whispered promise, mounting the terrified animal. He kicked the horse into a gallop, riding not away from the destruction, but directly into its heart. The journey to the coast was a ride through a nightmare. As he got closer, the air grew thick and hot. The smell was the first thing to hit him, a pungent, acrid stench of ozone, melting sulfur, and scorched earth. It smelled like lightning that had been bottled and left to rot. Birds were falling from the sky, dead from the shockwave. The forest was silent, save for the crackling of small fires started by falling debris. When Jin finally crested the cliffs overlooking the beach, he stopped. He looked down, and for the first time since the invasion began, he felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. The beach was gone. In its place was a glassed crater, the sand fused into jagged shards of obsidian by intense heat. The ocean was boiling, steam rolling off the waves in thick gray clouds. And in the center of this devastation, amidst the swirling steam and the ruin, stood a man. He was a titan. Even from this distance, Jin could see the sheer impossibility of his scale. He was a mountain of muscle, broad-shouldered and thick-limbed, standing amidst the surf like a jagged rock that the ocean could not erode. He wore armor that gleamed even in the darkness, circular silver plates etched with runes that hurt the eyes to look at, heavy gauntlets that looked capable of crushing a helmet like an eggshell, and a tattered, soaked red cape that dragged in the water behind him like the tail of a wounded dragon. In his right hand, he gripped a hammer. It was a strange, blocky weapon, gray and unadorned, seemingly too short for a man of his size, yet he held it with a familiarity that suggested it was an extension of his own arm. The giant threw his head back and screamed at the sky. It wasn't a scream of pain, but of command. "Heimdall, open the gate!" The voice was a physical force. It rolled up the cliffs, shaking the dust from Jin's armor. The sky remained dark. The clouds swirled, indifferent. The giant swung the hammer at the heavens, a gesture of violent frustration. "Odin! Father, do you mock me?" He struck the surface of the ocean with the weapon. Boom! A geyser of water erupted, shooting 50 feet into the air, raining down salt water and dead fish upon the blackened sand. Jin Sakai tied Nobu to a tree well back from the edge. This was not a fight for cavalry. He checked his weapons, his katana sharp and clean, his tanto, his kunai, his smoke bombs. He adjusted his mask, the ghost mask, designed to strike fear into the hearts of men. He wondered briefly if it would have any effect on a monster. He descended the cliff path, moving with the silence of a shadow. He stepped onto the glassed sand, his boots crunching softly on the debris. The giant was still facing the ocean, his chest heaving, his breathing ragged and loud. Jin stopped 50 paces away. He let the wind carry his voice. "You have broken the silence of this island," Jin announced, his tone flat, devoid of fear, filled only with the authority of the Jito's nephew. The giant froze. He didn't spin around in panic. He turned slowly, creating a wake in the water around his waist. He looked at Jin. The face of the stranger was a landscape of war. He had a thick blonde beard braided with salt and sweat, a scar running through one eyebrow, and eyes that were the piercing electric blue of a winter storm. He looked at Jin, at the black armor, the demonic mask, the twin swords, and his brow furrowed in confusion. "A dark elf," the giant rumbled. His Japanese was broken, the syllables crushed together with a guttural accent that sounded centuries old. "Or a demon of Muspelheim sent to mock my exile. Speak, shadow creature. Where have you banished me? Why is the Bifrost shattered?" "I know nothing of elves," Jin replied, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his katana. "And I have banished no one. But you are trespassing on Tsushima, and you have destroyed my coast." The giant laughed. It was a deep baritone sound that grated on Jin's nerves. "Tsushima? I care not for the name of this rock. I am Thor, son of Odin, god of thunder, and I demand you tell me where the All-Father is." Thor stepped out of the water, water cascading off his armor. As he stepped onto the sand, the ground shook. He was at least 1.5 feet taller than Jin, a towering wall of Asgardian might. "I am the protector of this people," Jin said, narrowing his eyes behind the mask. "And I do not care for your titles. Drop the weapon." Thor looked at the hammer, Mjolnir. He looked back at Jin with a grin that was both amused and dangerous. "Drop Mjolnir? You have courage, little demon, but you lack wisdom. I have wrestled the Midgard serpent. I have slain legions of frost giants. I do not disarm for a mortal in a Halloween mask." "Then you will bleed like a mortal," Jin said. Jin drew his katana. The sound of the steel leaving the scabbard was a high, clear note that cut through the sound of the wind. Shing! Thor's eyes lit up. He didn't look afraid. He looked delighted. "A challenge. Good. My blood has grown cold in this wretched water. Warm me up, little man." Thor didn't take a stance. He didn't bow. He simply exploded into motion. For a man of his size, his speed was terrifying. He didn't run. He propelled himself forward, kicking up clouds of wet sand. He covered the 50 paces in the blink of an eye. He raised the hammer high above his head, roaring a war cry that sounded like a rock slide. Jin analyzed the attack in a fraction of a second. The swing was wide. It was telegraphed. But the momentum behind it was unstoppable. If Jin tried to parry this with his katana, the hammer would shatter the blade and crush his skull beneath it. Jin dropped. He collapsed his knees, sliding forward through the slick mud and ash. The hammer whistled over his head. The wind pressure alone was enough to rip the rivets from his pauldrons. Mjolnir struck the ground behind him. Crack, boom! The impact was catastrophic. A crater 10 feet wide opened up in the sand. Shrapnel flew like arrows. Jin felt the shockwave ripple through his internal organs, bruising them instantly. Jin rolled to his feet, coming up behind the giant. He struck. A quick, precise slash aimed at the back of Thor's knee, a tendon cut meant to cripple. The Sakai steel, forged by the finest smiths in Japan, struck the Asgardian flesh. It felt like hitting a tire made of iron. The blade bit, yes. A line of bright, golden red blood welled up. But it didn't slice through. The muscle was too dense. The skin was too tough. Thor roared, not in pain, but in irritation. He spun around with a backhand swing of his fist. Jin saw it coming, but he misjudged the reach of the giant. Thor's armored forearm clipped Jin's shoulder. It was like being hit by a galloping horse. Jin was lifted off his feet and thrown 20 feet through the air. He crashed into a piece of driftwood, shattering it with his spine. He hit the sand and rolled, gasping for air, his vision swimming with white spots. His left shoulder went numb. Thor turned, wiping the blood from his leg. He looked at the cut, then at Jin. "You have a sharp tooth, Wolf, but you cannot kill a storm with a needle." Thor advanced. He didn't summon lightning. He tried. Jin saw him clench his fist, saw the veins bulge in his neck as he called for the power, but no sparks came. The god was stripped. He was relying on brute force alone, but his brute force was enough to level a city. Jin scrambled to his feet. He couldn't fight this man toe-to-toe. He couldn't trade blows. He had to be the ghost. He had to use fear, deception, and tools. "You are strong," Jin wheezed, spitting blood onto the black sand. "But strength makes you slow." "I am fast enough to crush you," Thor bellowed, swinging the hammer in a horizontal arc. Jin ducked under the swing and reached into his belt. He threw a sticky bomb. The pitch-covered explosive adhered to Thor's chest plate. Thor looked down at it, confused. "What is this, a toy?" Boom. The explosion engulfed Thor's chest in fire and shrapnel. A normal man would have been blown in half. Thor was merely staggered. He took a step back, coughing, batting at the flames on his cape. His armor was scorched, his beard singed, but he was standing. "Fire?" Thor laughed, his teeth stained with soot. "I have walked through the forges of Nidavellir. This is a spark." But the distraction worked. Jin was already moving. He threw a smoke bomb at Thor's feet. A cloud of thick, acrid gray smoke expanded instantly, blinding the giant. "Coward!" Thor yelled, swinging blindly into the smoke. "Fight me! Face me!" Jin moved silently through the haze. He was in his element now. He circled the giant, listening to the heavy footsteps. He climbed a jagged rock formation to his left, gaining height. As Thor emerged from the smoke, rubbing his stinging eyes, Jin leaped. He came down from above, his katana held in a reverse grip, aiming for the gap between Thor's neck and shoulder pauldron. A killing blow. Thor didn't see him, but he felt the displacement of the air. He sensed the intent. Thor twisted at the last second. The blade missed the neck, but plunged deep into the trapezoid muscle of Thor's shoulder. Thor screamed. This time it was pain, real pain. He reached up, with his free hand, grabbing Jin by the chest armor before the samurai could pull the blade out. "Got you," Thor snarled. He ripped Jin off his back and slammed him into the sand. The impact knocked the wind out of Jin completely. For a moment he couldn't breathe. He looked up to see Thor towering over him, the katana still sticking out of his shoulder. Thor reached up and pulled the sword out. He grunted, his face pale, blood streaming down his chest. He tossed the katana aside. It landed in the sand, out of Jin's reach. "You fight well," Thor said, his voice heavy with exertion. "Better than the dark elves. Better than the frost giants. You have the spirit of a Valkyrie." Thor raised the hammer. "But this ends now." Jin looked at the hammer. He looked at the face of the god. He saw no malice there, only the grim duty of a warrior. Jin's hand moved to his belt. He had one trick left. He drew his tanto, the short dagger. As Thor brought the hammer down, Jin rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding having his skull crushed. He scrambled on his hands and knees toward his fallen katana. Thor kicked him. The boot caught Jin in the ribs. Crack! Jin cried out, curling into a ball. The pain was blinding. He felt jagged bone grating against his lungs. He was broken. Thor stood over him, breathing heavily. The giant was bleeding from a dozen wounds. His leg, his shoulder, his chest, all were weeping golden red blood. He was tired. The mortal world was heavy, and without the Odin force, his stamina was draining. "Yield," Thor commanded. He lowered the hammer, leaning on it like a cane. There is no shame in falling to the son of Odin. You have fought with honor." Jin pushed himself up on one trembling arm. He looked at the sand, stained with his blood and the blood of the god. "Honor," Jin rasped, blood bubbling past his lips. "Honor means protecting those who cannot protect themselves." Jin forced himself to his knees. He looked up at Thor. "And I do not yield." Thor's expression softened. He looked at the small, broken man who refused to stay down. He saw the fire in Jin's eyes, a fire that matched his own. "Stubborn," Thor muttered. But there was a smile in his voice. Like a dwarf. Thor took a step back. He hooked Mjolnir onto his belt. "I will not kill you," Thor said. Jin blinked, confused. "Why?" "Because you are the only thing on this rock that has made me feel alive since I fell," Thor said. He looked at his own wounds. "And because you fight for your people. My father would like you." Thor looked at the horizon. The sun was beginning to bleed over the edge of the ocean, painting the water in hues of violet and gold. The storm had passed. "I must go," Thor said abruptly. He felt a pull in his gut, a compass needle in his soul pointing east. "I do not belong here, and if I stay, I will only bring more destruction to your shores." "Where will you go?" Jin asked, holding his side. "To find a way home," Thor said. "Or to find a glorious death. It matters not." Thor turned and began to walk toward the water. He didn't look back. He walked with a limp, favoring his cut leg, but his stride was still powerful. Jin watched him go. "Wait," Jin called out. Thor stopped, turning his head slightly. "What is your name?" Jin asked, truly. "I told you," the giant rumbled. "I am Thor." "Thor," Jin repeated, testing the strange, short word. "The god of thunder." "Today," Thor said, looking at his hammer which had failed to spark. "I am just a man with a hammer. And that is a terrifying thing to be." Thor turned back to the ocean. He waded in until the water was at his chest. Then, he began to swim. He swam with powerful strokes, moving away from Tsushima, moving toward the unknown, toward the rising sun. Jin Sakai sat in the bloody sand for a long time. He watched until the golden head of the god was just a speck in the distance. He watched until the sea swallowed him up. Slowly, painfully, Jin crawled to his katana. He used it to pull himself to his feet. He staggered to his horse, Nobu, who nickered softly at his approach. Jin mounted his horse, gritting his teeth against the pain in his ribs. He looked back at the cratered beach, the glassed sand, the ruin of the landscape. He had fought a god, and he had survived. "Let's go, Nobu," Jin whispered. "We have a war to finish." As he rode back toward the golden forest, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves. For a moment, it sounded like thunder, but Jin knew it was just the wind. The god was gone, but the ghost remained.